What's up, everybody? Welcome in, and welcome to episode 3 of Ask Uncle Boneless, the fighting game advice show for fighting game noobs. Before we get into the video, I really just want to say that even though the channel and these videos are still relatively small and relatively new, y'all have been nothing but supportive as I've started putting this content out. So I just want to give my heartfelt thanks for all of your support, all of your kind words. And if you're new here, welcome. I hope you enjoy. Consider clicking the subscribe button, hitting the bell, and doing all that sort of stuff if you too are enjoying what you see. All right, now let's get into it. For this video, we're looking at a question from KHFan950 via Discord. KH asks, what's the best fighting game for an absolute noob? Like, would you throw a noob to the wolves with something like MVC2 or Darkstalkers, or would you start slow with SF2? KH, this is such an important question, so thank you so much for asking it. As much as this series is directed towards newcomers to fighting games, it's so important to remember that more experienced members of the FGC have a vital role to play when it comes to being good stewards of the genre, and ideally growing the fighting game player base. So with that said, this episode goes out, at least in part, to those of you who already have some experience with fighting games, and who are looking for a good way to introduce newcomer friends to them without scaring them off. Alright, now that we're clear on that, let's start looking at what the best game is to introduce newcomers to the wonderful world of fighting games. This is something that is largely dependent on the person in question. The fighting game genre has no shortage of games, and while that can potentially lead to some choice paralysis, it also means that there's a very good chance that, if you know your friend well enough, you can find just the right game to get them hooked. That said, while the easy answer is to simply say, pick whatever game looks interesting and go with that, I think that, at least in my experience, there are 4 big factors to consider that can make a game more or less likely to hook potential new players. First, it is imperative that we consider ease of gameplay. How easy is a game for absolute newcomers to pick up and play? The easier the mechanics, the easier it is for new players to get the hang of, and the more likely it is that they'll enjoy themselves and keep playing. With that in mind, I would avoid tag games such as Marvel vs. Capcom, Skullgirls, or King of Fighters, at least for a first game. Second, and tangentially related to point 1, we have CPU difficulty. Is the AI punishingly difficult? That's more than enough to get many people to rage quit the whole fighting game genre entirely. Many classic fighting games, such as Street Fighter II, can be very beginner-unfriendly in their solo player experiences. The original arcade iterations were designed to eat your quarters, after all. Thankfully, most modern fighting games, including ports of the classics, have adjustable difficulty, so don't be afraid to toggle that difficulty to your preferred level of enjoyment. Our third factor is cost and availability. This is pretty straightforward. The more readily available and inexpensive a game is, the more likely someone is to pick it up. Tekken 8 is amazing, but a full AAA price tag for a first-time player may be a big ask. Similarly, there are some retro masterpieces, but the chances of getting a total fighting game noob to pony up secondary market prices on something they may not even enjoy are, understandably, next to impossible. Fourth, and arguably most important, is roster size and variety. Any fighting game player will attest to the fact that a good roster can make or break a game. Much like Pokemon, every fighting game character, no matter how weird or obscure, is going to be somebody's favorite. And a large, varied group of fighters means that you're more likely to find one that gels with you. A large roster will also help keep things fresher longer for solo gameplay as well, as even when you choose a main, and maybe even a secondary, you have a greater number of opponents to go toe-to-toe against. So, taking these 4 factors into consideration, what do I consider to be the most ideal fighting game for newcomers? This may be a polarizing opinion, but I think there's a strong argument to be made for Street Fighter V. Now look, I know within the FGC there are some very heated opinions about SF5, and many of those opinions are certainly merited, especially among higher level players. However, this is not a video for higher level players. Now, let's look again at the 4 factors for a beginner-friendly fighting game and see where SF5 falls. Ease of gameplay. Figuring out the basics of SF5 takes very little time, whether you play through the tutorial or you have a friend explaining them. The V-trigger system is simple enough to figure out, and once you start learning special moves, so is the EX meter. Even the inputs for critical arts are heavily standardized, so it doesn't take long for even the most green fighting game player to start doing cool stuff. And doing cool stuff in a video game will make you want to keep playing 9 times out of 10. CPU difficulty. Even at its default setting, SF5's AI is fairly forgiving, and that's set to a 4 out of potential 8 levels, so there's plenty of room to play around and tailor the experience to your tastes. Further, unlike in many of the classic fighting games, and even some modern ones, boss characters during arcade modes don't have the same spike in difficulty that's kept me from consistently beating Street Fighter Alpha 2. Cost and availability. Street Fighter V launched in 2016. Even at full price on Steam, it won't set you back more than $30 Canadian, and Capcom has sales all the time. And for those of you watching who have PlayStation Plus, Street Fighter V is one of the free games you get with your subscription, so the price of admission is about as good as you can get. Also, because the game is no longer being updated, there's no need to worry about the FOMO that can come when new characters drop. Which is a great segue into roster size and variety. Yes, SF5 was heavily criticized for its roster at launch. However, by its final season, the game had a total of 45 characters, each with their individual look, personality, and nuances, and with a good balance of new and returning characters. And if that number is giving you choice paralysis, don't worry. My video on fighting game archetypes might help you narrow down your options. Link in the description. As I mentioned before, there are plenty of legitimate criticisms of Street Fighter V, but even among the fighting game community, there have been plenty of people who have been revisiting it recently. And the reality of that is, in spite of all its flaws, Street Fighter V is a fun game. And if you're trying to get into anything for the first time, isn't having fun the most important part? As you progress in your fighting game journey, you may find that other games are more to your taste for one reason or another, and that's okay. But for a first foray into the genre, you'd be hard-pressed to find a title that ticks all the boxes quite like this one. And now for another bonus question from Tomadoc. This episode, he asks, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Well, Toma, if the woodchuck is a Tekken player, then the answer is exactly 1 Mokujin. And that's all for this episode. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like it, and drop a comment and let me know what you think is a good fighting game for first-timers. If you have your own burning fighting game questions that you want answered, head over to my Discord and pop it in the Ask Uncle Boneless channel, and I will try my level best to answer as best I can. Remember, y'all, Uncle Boneless says fighting games are for everyone. See you next time.